Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is day 10 of the 12 days of Christmas, and today we're going to be talking about all of the reading challenges that I did in 2025. And yes, as I'm filming this, it is New Year's Eve, and I'm drinking out of this cup, turning off the lights so that there's not a glare. This cup, where can we get a good view of it? Which is from, yes, Y2K, the year 2000. I got this cup in Russia because that is where I was in the year 2000 as the year was turning. So I've had this cup for 25 years, going strong. This year is almost officially over, and I'm not ready to film any of my reviews of all of my reading in 2025 or goal sets, etc., because I plan to do a little more reading today. We'll see if it probably won't affect anything because I don't think I'll finish anything, but I did want to wait until the year was officially over before I talked about all that. However, I have completed all of the reading challenges that I started in 2025, which I'm pretty proud of. Ever since I started doing reading challenges, I've been pretty intent on finishing them. There have been one or two throughout the years that maybe were too challenging that I kind of stopped doing midway through the year or kind of gave up on. But by and large, the annual reading challenges that I have been doing for the past 6, 7, 8 years or so, I have stuck to them. And it's something that I really enjoy every year. It gives me a little bit of direction in my reading choices, which I really like. And honestly, I think at the bottom of it, there's just this thrill of crossing something off a list. I don't know, it's very motivating for me. So I enjoy each of these books as I read them, crossing them off the list. But I also enjoy that most of these challenges, at least the ones I choose, are structured so that there's one book a month. And that's not too demanding because I read more than one book a month. It's not interfering too much with my reading choices. Now, last year I did 4 reading challenges, which means that there were 4 mandatory choices every month, which was a little bit harder to do, but I succeeded. I'm going to do the same thing again in 2026, but this time I'm not going to be strict with myself about doubling up on books for those challenges. So if I find a book that fits 2 or more of the 4 reading challenges that I'm doing, I'm going to count it for all of them. It's all supposed to be fun, and that way I can still be crossing items off the list and completing these challenges and still enjoying my reading. So let's talk though about the reading challenges that I did in 2025. And I'm going to start with the one that I added in last. Late in 2024, I started seeing information online about how Jane Austen's 250th birthday would be in 2025. And Jane Austen has been my favorite author since I was a teenager. And I thought to myself, there is no way that I can allow 2025 to pass without honoring the 250th birth year of my favorite author, my all-time favorite author. So I just put a shout out to the world just to see if anybody would join me in celebrating Jane Austen's birthday, and Charlene at Coffee and a Book responded immediately, and she was very enthused about it. And so the two of us hatched up a plan, and honestly, Charlene contributed so much to the idea and the structure and the books and everything that we did. So I really appreciated Charlene coming along and helping me put this plan together at the last minute. Towards the middle end of the year, both of our lives just got really busy, so we failed in some of the video plans that we were supposed to do, and I still have yet to film. Well, I filmed it. I still have yet to upload my final video in celebration of Jane Austen's 250th birthday, but I did complete all of the reading, and we did 80% or more of all of our other plans that we had of joint videos and other various collab ideas. So anyway, it was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. So next time I have a favorite author celebrating a huge milestone, that I should do something similar, maybe not year long. Jane Austen was worth an entire year. I don't know about anybody else, so I give them a whole entire year of my life, but you know, it could happen. Anyway, I had so much fun. So in the list of books, we decided that we wanted to read all of Jane Austen's novels. Plus, we wanted to add in the books that influenced Jane Austen. Well, not all of them, because there were many. She was very well read. But we wanted to add in books that were very prominent in influencing the books that she wrote. So we included Pamela by Samuel Richardson, because Samuel Richardson was actually one of Austen's favorite authors, and there were elements in Pamela that influenced the way that Austen wrote, particularly in Sense and Sensibility, which was her first novel. So we read Pamela, and then we read Sense and Sensibility. Anne Radcliffe was another favorite author of Jane Austen's, and so she was heavily influenced by Anne Radcliffe and the genre that sprung up around Anne Radcliffe's novels, the Gothic genre, that was hugely popular when Jane Austen was a young woman. And she was very much inspired by that genre when she wrote Northanger Abbey. Now, she wrote Northanger Abbey with a twist, so that it wasn't a straight Gothic novel. It was more of a satire of a Gothic novel. But it was all in good fun. It wasn't like, okay, Gothic novels are stupid, and so I'm going to satirize them. No, it was, Gothic novels are so fun, I'm going to make this fun version of a Gothic novel. So that was another one that we read, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Also in Mansfield Park, the play Lovers' Vows features prominently in the plot of that story, and the characters in the story acted out, as most of you probably know. And so we read Lovers' Vows prior to reading Mansfield Park, and that was a lot of fun. And there was another one that we read, oh yes, Cecilia by Frances Burney. And Frances Burney was another heavily influential author in Jane Austen's life, and Austen obviously borrowed some phrases from Burney's writing, as well as some sketches of characters, and not as much, I don't think, her style of writing, maybe a little bit to a certain extent, but there were other aspects of Burney's writing that Austen adapted and used in her own writing. It just, probably, not even consciously. But anyway, so we read Cecilia, which was a very long book. It was very interesting. Could have been shorter in my opinion, but it was good. There were also a couple of other optional reads, like at the beginning of the year, if you didn't want to read Pamela, which was, you know, honestly probably a good choice for a lot of people. There was the Lost Memoirs or the Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen, something like that, by Siri James. So some people read that one. I did not read that this year. I had read it before and really enjoyed it. I opted to read Pamela instead. And then at the end of the year, there were several different options. You could read Lady Susan, which I had read at the beginning of last year, and so I didn't want to reread it quite so soon. And then there were two other Christmas books. One was Christmas with Jane Austen, which I think may have had like Christmas scenes from her books in it perhaps. And then the other one was about Christmas in the Regency era, which is the one that I read, which was a lot of fun to read about Christmas customs in the Regency era. So that is a lot of talking about the Jane Austen 250th celebration. I won't go into any more detail about any of the books because I have my ranking video coming up, and that will talk about how I felt about all of the actual Austen books. And I've already told you basically how I felt about all the other books that we read, but just in general, it was such a fun challenge. It was added at the last minute, but it really made my reading so rewarding in 2025, and it was fun to read all of Austen's novels in one year, which I'd never done before, and read them back to back and to compare and contrast and to really be amazed and impressed by the ability of this woman, how her writing grew over the course of her life, but also how she was able to present such different characters in her stories. Her stories, none of them are dramatic with crazy things happening. None of them have insane plots. They're all pretty basic plots. They're more character driven than they are plot driven, and each character and each character situation is so unique and so insightful that it was just a lot of fun to read all of them back to back. This coming year in 2026, I don't know that I will pick up any of Austen's actual novels, except perhaps there's some of her juvenilia that I have not read yet that I would like to get my hands on and read. I think that would be fun, so I may do that in 2026. But also, I have a lot of Jane Austen related books that I'm definitely hoping to read them as we go through the year, and read all the ones that I have on my shelf, definitely, that are related to Austen, starting in January with a couple epistolary versions. So I'm still going to be reading a lot of Jane Austen related stuff in 2026, but novels, I'm good for now. So that was the challenge added at the last minute. The other three were the ones that I had already decided that I would do. First of all, my Reading the Classics challenge, which was the first time I had ever designed and hosted a challenge myself. And here's my first spread in my journal from 2025. And I did it because I had previously participated in Reading the Classics challenges that had different types of classics to read each month, and I really, really enjoyed them. But it was not on BookTube, and when I was like, I don't know, it was just easier for me to have everything in one place. And so when I talked about this challenge I'm doing and that challenge I'm doing, just to be able to like tag the video that was referring to or the person or whatever. But for this challenge, I was constantly having to link outside of YouTube, and also all the information was elsewhere. And as well, like I wanted the fun of coming up with my own prompts and challenges and to inspire me specifically with reading classics. But I definitely wanted something that pushed me to read classics I wouldn't otherwise pick up. Because as much as I love reading classics, I do need a little nudge to force me to pick them up. And so I knew I needed a challenge to have me reading at least one a month. Now, in the end, I read significantly more than that, but I knew I needed that challenge. So I made it myself, and it was so fun. And I went all the way, and I had multiple levels, and I had different like reading life challenges on top of the actual reading prompts. And it was so much fun. And there was a lot of interaction on my Discord server, which I started in part because of this challenge, that I wanted to interact with people in this reading challenge. And I thoroughly enjoyed that so much. It was so fun. I have simplified the 2026 reading challenge, but that doesn't mean I won't ever go back to this format again, because it was fun too. I just like to switch it up a little bit every year. So the primary challenge for my Reading the Classics challenge was each month a specific prompt for a type of book. And then there were scavenger hunt items that you could find as you read through the books. Either it could be something that was on the cover or in the title, or something that you encountered as you read the book. So I didn't do as well with the scavenger hunt items, but that was just for fun, like an extra layer to like be looking for these things as you read these books, see if you could find them. For January, I did include Pamela as my book for the first prompt, even though it was also the book for the Jane Austen 250th birthday celebration. So I met my rules for that month, but that was fine because it was a long book and it was a bit of a slog to get through. So that was a good choice. Anyway, so read a book from your physical TBR was the prompt, and I read Pamela by Samuel Richardson. The scavenger hunt items were a book, a male protagonist, and winter. And of those, there were some winter elements, not a lot, but there were some winter elements there, and then a book. So like discussion of a book, like they're talking about a book or something like that. And so then there was that in the story as well. So that was January, and that was quite a start to the year. It definitely provoked a lot of conversation and discussion in the Discord server, and it prompted a lot of thinking and research on my part of this book and Samuel Richardson and culture in England at the time, and Samuel Richardson's effect on Jane Austen. So in that sense, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a very educational experience, if nothing else. And then February was to read a Gothic novel. And I kind of went a different direction than I had intended to when I made that prompt. I was thinking along the lines of Anne Radcliffe or something like that. But in the end, I went with And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And the scavenger hunt items were a nightmare, a skeleton, and a castle. And so a nightmare featured in the story, as well as a castle of sorts. It was on a secluded island. And it was such a great read. I mean, looking back, it was definitely one of my top reads of 2025, and I thoroughly enjoyed that one. Then March was to read a children's book. And I reread a childhood favorite, Jack and Jill by Louisa May Alcott. And I definitely enjoyed that sentimental journey of reading that novel that I had read with so much fondness and affection when I was a child more than once. That prompt, the scavenger hunt items were siblings, a mother, and a pet. And it had all of those. So I was able to cross off all of those on that list. In April, the prompt was to read a memoir. And so I read The Life and Diary of David Brainerd, which strictly speaking was actually a diary, not a memoir per se. It wasn't him looking back on his life, it was him writing in real time. And it was compiled afterwards by I think Jonathan Edwards. And it was very interesting. He was a a preacher and a missionary in the early years of the United States. Actually, I think it was like during the French and Indian War that he was writing, that he was ministering, and he was ministering to Native Americans and preaching to them and trying to start churches literally in the wilderness of the Northeast United States. And Buddy read that together with Hope at Hopefully Books, and we both enjoyed it. There wasn't as much biographical information as I would have liked, so I still kind of want to read an actual biography of him, but it was very interesting. It was very challenging in my personal faith. And the scavenger hunt items were a famous person, a work of art, and a war. There was no work of art, but there was a famous person. Actually, David Brainerd was well connected. And like I said, Jonathan Edwards, who was a famous preacher during that time, and one of the preachers in the Great Awakening, he is mentioned multiple times in that book, as well as a handful of other people who were influential in the early days of the United States of America. And as I said, there was the French and Indian War was happening around that time. There were skirmishes. I don't know that the actual war was taking place at that point in time, but there were definitely skirmishes. And David Brainerd was kind of like on the outskirts of those skirmishes and would mention them. So I got that that scavenger hunt item. And then May was to reread a favorite, and I read Anne of Ingleside by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which is not my favorite of that series, but that whole series is a favorite. And it was on my reread list. It was the next one in the series that I needed to read, so I counted it for that. And scavenger hunt items were childhood, high school, recent history. And so I put childhood on there. Then in June, the prompt was to read a book with 500 plus pages. And I read Mansfield Park by Jane Austen because I don't know that her original book is that long, but my annotated edition was definitely much more than 500 pages. So that qualified. And again, that was a crossover with the Jane Austen 250th birthday celebration. And that one, the scavenger hunt items were a foreign country, a female protagonist, and Greek mythology. And I got all of those because in that story, Sir Bertram, he ends up going to the Caribbean islands. Now, we don't go with him, but there's a lot of talk about it. And then there is a female protagonist, Fanny Price, and then Greek mythology is mentioned a few times during the course of this story. In particular, I remember a moment when they are discussing the education of the young women, and Greek mythology was one of the subjects that they studied. In July, the prompt was to read like Jane Austen. And so I read The Gossip Story by Jane West, which apparently was, the plot was very, very, very similar to Sense and Sensibility, very similar. And so a lot of people think that this was like Jane Austen was writing, I don't know, a response to it or a version of it, an adaptation, whatever. She was definitely strongly inspired, but it's also very different, and Jane Austen did it way better. Like, it was fine, it was a good story or whatever, but Sense and Sensibility is definitely better. And for the scavenger hunt items, a sense of humor, a naval captain, and a letter. I know a sense of humor was in there, and I think there was a letter. I didn't mark any of them. I don't know about a naval captain. So then in August, read a translated work. And so I read the Epic of Gilgamesh. Obviously, it was not written in English, a very ancient story. And for the scavenger hunt items, a language you don't know, a language you know, and poetry. And I crossed off a language I don't know and poetry because both of them, well, the original book was written in a language I don't know, and then it was, there was poetry included. And that was very interesting. It wasn't like, you know, a novel you sit down and read just for enjoyment, that sort of thing. But it was definitely very interesting and educational. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't very difficult to read either. And then in September, the prompt was to read a comedy by Shakespeare, and I read As You Like It, which was not my favorite of his comedies, but I crossed it off the list, so there's a lot of joy in that. And the scavenger hunt items were a love story, a mistaken identity, and a song, and all of those were definitely in that one for sure. In October, the prompt was to read a sci-fi or time travel novel, and I picked Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I read that with Faith at Faith in Books, and we both just really, really enjoyed it, and we got so much out of it. I enjoyed my discussions with her about that. There was a mad scientist in there for the scavenger hunt items, but not a time machine or any kind of sailing vessel, so I did get the mad scientist prompt, or item though. Anyway, thoroughly enjoyed that one. 5-star book all the way. November was read an essay or a book of essays, and I finally got around to Areopagitica and of Education by John Milton, plus there were some others in the book that I read. And the scavenger hunt items were nature, education, and philosophy. Definitely hit on education and philosophy, although not nature so much. So that was very good. I'm glad I finally read that. It wasn't, my favorite essays that I've ever read, but I can see how formative they were to thinking of culturally English-speaking people, and how instrumental it was in the development of our own Bill of Rights and educational practices in the United States of America. So from a historical perspective, it was fascinating and I really enjoyed it. Then December was to read a Christmas short story, and I read 4 short stories by Hans Christian Andersen. And the scavenger hunt items were a Christmas tree, a Christmas present, and a surprise guest. And there were no surprise guests, but there were Christmas trees and Christmas presents. And I did enjoy those stories with Hans Christian Andersen. He definitely is not afraid to go a little deeper and darker with his stories than most, especially since they were written for children. But he still always has hope in them. And he does also like animate objects. So like in one story, it was a fir tree, another story, it was a snowman. So he's able to get into some really kind of dark themes, but because he's using not people, but otherwise inanimate objects, and I forget what the word is, but making them alive, it helps to get across his themes and his ideas without having it be quite so tragic in a way that's very approachable for children. So I did enjoy those stories by Hans Christian Andersen. So that was my Reading the Classics challenge. My first year hosting the challenge was a great success, and I'm really looking forward to the 1776 edition in 2026. I also did, for the second year in a row, Chantel's Read Your Bookshelf challenge, and she had 1-word prompts for each one, and that was actually very difficult for me. The whole year I had such a hard time finding books on my shelf that went with those prompts. I don't know what it was. I was having a hard time. But I did find books, and some of them were some of my favorite books of the year. So in January, the prompt was Beauty, and I read Only the Beautiful by Susan Meisner. And that was one of 2 Susan Meisner books that I read in 2025. And she's definitely an author I want to read everything that she has written. One book I have read by her that I DNF'd and I probably won't pick back up again. But most of the books I've read by her, I've enjoyed to one extent or another. Maybe not as much, but her writing is definitely excellent, and I have enjoyed her storylines overall. Then in February, the prompt was Size, and I read The Oedipus Plays of Sophocles, and I read it because it was a very short book. I don't know, I think it was fewer than 100 pages all told. It was a very thin little book, so that was the reason for the size, or the connection to size. And I did enjoy them. There was a lot happening in those plays. There was a lot of traumatic things happening in those plays. It was interesting, but I did read it. And then March, the prompt was Time, and I read The 5th of March by Anne Rinaldi, and I didn't love it. That was not one of my favorite reads of the year. I don't think I gave that very many stars. In April, the prompt was Flowers, and I read The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan because there were a lot of flowers on the cover. It was a really beautiful cover. And again, I didn't love it. Not a favorite read. And I'd had that one on my shelf for a long time wanting to read it, so it was a bit of a disappointment, but I had hauled it, so it's gone now. Then in May, a favorite, and so I read Jane Austen, A Life by Claire Tomlin, and of course I read it because Jane Austen is a favorite of mine. And I did enjoy that biography by Claire Tomlin. It's one of my favorite biographies that I've read so far by Austen, although I haven't read a perfect one yet. Still waiting to find the perfect biography. Then in June, the prompt was Bird, and I read The Lost Book by Eleanor Dare. No, The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare. I don't have the author on here. And that one was another disappointment, unfortunately. And I picked it because there was a peacock on the cover, and a peacock features in the story. But it was ultimately disappointing. It wasn't really much about Eleanor Dare or the Lost Colony of Roanoke. It was about the supposed descendants of Eleanor Dare. It was a little bit fanciful. It wasn't really any fantasy, but there were some elements that were not quite realistic either, intentionally, like mystical maybe. And there were some other broader themes in it that I wasn't really fully on board with, especially the way they were portrayed in the story. And the main character I didn't really like, so wasn't a favorite. Then in July, the prompt was Royalty, and I read The Other Princess by Denny S. Bryce. And I really enjoyed reading more about this girl, but I'm not sure that she was quite portrayed faithfully in this story. And in fact, I almost hope she wasn't, because she was very immature for most of the story and had attitude issues. So if the author was trying to present her in a pleasing light, she didn't really succeed. But I think that the actual woman was probably a much better woman than the way she was portrayed in this story. And then in August, the prompt was space, and I read A Moonbow Night by Laura France, which was an author that I want to read to zero, but I am behind on that. So I'm glad that I was able to cross one or two books by her off my list this year. And I did enjoy reading that one. It was very good. I enjoyed the story a lot. It didn't actually have a lot to do with space, but I picked it because Moonbow Night, you know, like a moonbow is in the sky. So that's why I went with it. Then in September, the prompt was travel, and I read The Lady with the Dark Hair by Erin Bartels. Another disappointment. I just didn't love that one. I didn't love the characters. I didn't love the things that they were doing in the story, and the convoluted relationships that were a little iffy, to be honest, in both the historic and the modern timeline. And it was, in the end, it was not to my taste. The writing was good, but the actual story and the characters didn't love. In October, the prompt was history, and I read The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte by Ciri James. Definitely enjoyed that one. That was a good one. I always enjoy what I read by Ciri James. It should have been more like a memoir of Charlotte Bronte, but that's a minor quibble. Then in November, the prompt was food, and I read L-M-N-O-P by Mark Dunn, and that was a delight. I really enjoyed that one. The only connection to food was the P on the front cover, but there were discussions of food during the course of the book as well, so that counts. December was Frosty, and I read Once Upon a Wardrobe by Patty Callahan, which definitely had, you know, Frosty on the cover and Frosty elements in the story, so that totally fit. So finally, I read the Jane Reads Christian Fiction Reading Challenge in 2025. And this video is already pretty long, so I'm just going to kind of quickly go through these. This was the first time I had done this reading challenge, and I wanted a fun challenge of books that would be fun and easy to read. And so definitely accomplished that purpose this year. In January, I switched out the actual prompt she had for one of her bonus prompts, and I read a booktuber recommendation. I read Positively Penelope by Pepper Basham, and that one was recommended to me by multiple booktubers, and I did enjoy that one very much. I think Authentically Izzy is my favorite book so far in that series, but Positively Penelope was pretty good too. And February was a favorite author. So I read If the Boot Fits by Karen Wittemeyer because she is one of my favorite authors. And I did enjoy that one as well. It is a Western retelling of the Cinderella fairy tale, but it's gender swapped. And the gender swapping doesn't work as well in that story as it might in some others. And that, honestly, it was a little bit, that's the one aspect of the story I didn't love as much, but it was still pretty good. And then in March, I read The Paris Dressmaker by Christie Cameron, and the prompt was set outside home country. That one was set in France during World War II with the resistance, the French resistance, and it was very good. It was hard to read in spots. It was a difficult read, but it was very good, very well written. Thoroughly enjoyed that one. And then April, the prompt was a new to you author, so I read A Lady's Guide to Marvelous and Misadventures by Angela Bell, and that was a buddy read with Charlene, Coffee and a Book, and we both really enjoyed that. There were some aspects we didn't love as much. The mother character in this story was so annoying, and yeah, she was obnoxious, but she was supposed to not. I mean, in a way she was, but also in a way the things that she was doing that made her obnoxious were meant to be, I think, positive aspects of her character. And yeah, missed the mark for me. But otherwise, it was very good. And in May, a book set in the South, and so I read Mountain Laurel by Laurie Benton, which was set in, I want to say South Carolina. Definitely in the South. It was on a plantation in the Revolutionary era of or colonial era of the United States. And it was very good. I enjoyed that one. And then in June, a one-word title, and I read Shiloh by Laurie Benton because that was the next book in the series, and I kind of just wanted to read it, so I did, and it was pretty good. Between not my favorite books ever, but Laurie Benton's writing was very good, and I would definitely read more by her. In July, the prompt was set in your home country, and I read Not a Sparrow Falls by Linda Nichols, which not only is set in my home country, but in my home state, and actually in my region of the state. So it was very close to home, set very close to home, and it was a reread for me. It was one that I had enjoyed the first time I read it, and I enjoyed the second time I read it, really liked it. Great book. I have read everything by Linda Nichols. She only wrote, I don't know, 5 or 6 books, and I want to reread them all because she was one of the best Christian authors out there. In August, the prompt was an element of suspense, and I read On the Cliffs of Foxglove Manor by Jamie Jo Wright, and it was very good. Jamie Jo Wright is always a good time. It's not my favorite book of hers that I have read, but it was very good. Then in September, we have a book in a series, and I read Every Hour Until Then by Gabrielle Meyer, and so good. Every book in that series has been so good. I've rated them differently, like 3, 4, and 5 stars when I read them as I finish them. But in the end, when I'm looking back on them, I'm just feeling all 5 stars. They just really very enjoyable. October was a Christie Award finalist, and I read Night Falls on Predicament Avenue by Jamie Jo Wright, and that may be my favorite Jamie Jo Wright book. I really enjoyed Night Falls on Predicament Avenue. So if you are wanting to start with Jamie Jo Wright, that would be my recommendation for a good place to start. November, a new to your TBR book, and that was A Love Restored by Kelly Goshorn, which I'm not exactly sure if that's how you say her name, but I had picked that up at a book fair, and it was a local author and a new to me author, and I really enjoyed it. It was also set in my area, not too far, but in a historical time period in the Reconstruction era. And so it dealt a lot with like race relations and that sort of thing. And it was really overall very well done. A nice balance of humor, but also depth in the story as well. The only thing I didn't like was there was a lot of the time of the story was spent in discussing the body image of the main character. And I'm not really interested in that as a theme in a story. It was too much for me, but I found that a lot of people really appreciated that about the story. So if that sounds good to you, you would probably really like it. And then finally for December, a book that includes a holiday, and I read This Promised Land by Catherine Golke, which might be one of my favorite books of the whole entire year. It's not a Christmas novel, but it has strong themes of Christmas in it. The setting is a Christmas tree farm, and it goes throughout a whole year, but of course, Christmas is a big part of it because it's a Christmas tree farm. And also, like, it definitely has some vibes of like It's a Wonderful Life and that kind of story, like the value of relationships and the value of a person's life and the input that they have. And it was a very heartwarming read. It made me cry and it made me laugh, and I really enjoyed it. So of Kathy Golke's books, it's probably one of my favorites. So those were my reading challenges that I participated in 2025, and I hope you enjoyed this fairly lengthy, chatty video. Tomorrow's video, I will be discussing my stats for my 2025 reading, my overall year in review. It will hopefully be a much shorter video than this one. This one was got kind of chatty, which I figured it would, but so stick around for tomorrow and we'll have a shorter discussion about my reading in 2025. Let me know in the comments how you did with your challenges this year, how many you participated in, which one was your favorite, and did you stick with all of them? And we will talk in the comments, and I will see you next time. Bye.